Hello and welcome to Poems On. I'm Al Basile, and this is the fourth episode of the third season. Our theme is creators, and we have some multi-active creators as guests. So for our new guest, we have Meredith Bergmann, and for our returning guest, Rick Mullin. Welcome to you two. It's great to see you.
Thank you, Al. It's a pleasure to be here.
Believe me, it's my pleasure. Let's get right into it. And because Meredith is the newest guest, I'm going to ask her to go first, and I'm going to try to pull up the image that will accompany what she's going to read first.
All right.
Can you see it? Take it away.
Yep. This is a sculpture called Forbidden Fruit. And there's a story behind that, but I think I'll just read the poem. The poem is from a series that the working title is The Museum of Sex. And it's kind of a romantic and sexual history in terms of different galleries in a huge museum. This one is The Dark Ages. I had a childhood without nudity, male nudity. My father always clothed, my brother, lesser copy, unexposed. I never saw a photograph that helped. In a darkened junior high school health class once, we were shown slides of private parts on screen, discolored and distorted by disease. There seemed to be no beauty in the unknown. In high school, more than ready for a dawning, I roamed museums. All the glistening statues were babies, or were sporting leaves or feathers. Even in art class, life drawing meant drawing bodies encased in nylon. I refused. I felt art owed me all the altogether. And the sculpture was made for an exhibition. The curator was calling the exhibition The Artist in the Garden, I think, or The Garden in the Gallery. And she came and looked at my work and she said, "Oh, your work is, it's wonderful, but it's all for children." I thought she was insane, but I thought, okay, I've got to make an adult sculpture. I've got to make something utterly adult. Well, maybe therefore it should be X-rated. So this is a sculpture of fig leaves, which in museums cover up private parts, and then the forbidden fruits.
One sees more and more and more examples of the forbidden fruits the closer one examines this image.
It's supposed to be subtle.
Oh, it is subtle. It's hilarious. I thought. How often are you prompted by a request or a commission at this stage in your life, or was it always like that? Or did you start out doing work completely out of your own impulses without thinking about its eventual finding a home or not? How did that happen for you?
I always had some idea of where something should go, even if it was imaginary, because I often felt prompted to make things that should exist, even if only I thought they should exist, like the world needed them, but no one knew that. And I often responded from a negative emotion. I got pissed off, or I felt let down, or I was disappointed. And then I would get an idea, and then I would be happy and enjoying making the thing, even if it was 3 years late to answer whatever had prompted it.
Wow. So the emotional, there's actually an emotional tell. There was something that...
Yeah, there's a relation to a person, in this case, this curator, and then to an imaginary audience who would see this and want to run a frieze of it all around the ceiling of their room or something. You know,
Yes.
that's the idea.
Has,
That it belongs in
has
the
it,
villa.
now I don't, I occasionally get feedback from listeners about my music. Have you had a lot of comments about this piece? Was anyone scandalized?
I generally, if there's children around, I don't explain it. I do tell people that it's a kind of a double take piece. Sometimes I tell this whole story, but I let it dawn on people. I have a copy of it in my studio, and it's very beautifully lit, but I don't say anything beyond the
I like
title.
that. I like that. But to your knowledge, no one has come to you expressing their outrage.
Oh, no, no, no. Because
That's
it's
good.
funny. It's subtle and it's hidden and it's funny.
Well, later on, I'm going to have something to say about the idea of hiding what you're doing in plain sight, because it's something that I try to do very often with my songs.
Mhm.
But
Great.
this is a terrific way to get us started. Let me turn to you, Rick, and have you get us going on your side of things. And if I understand correctly, I should be able to share your image here.
Nice.
That's the one. Yeah, I wanted to begin with an ekphrastic poem on a painting by David Park.
Mm.
He's somewhat obscure. Basically, he is really at the forefront of the Bay Area figurative painters who are heroes of mine.
Yeah.
Who, when California was trying to keep up with abstraction in New York, is said to have driven all of his abstract paintings to the dump and started painting figuratively again. And he brought Richard Diebenkorn on and Elmer Bischoff and a lot of tremendous painters that really came up with an actual definable approach. And they're called the Bay Area figurative painters. And I think, I want to start with this poem because it is an attempt to get at how an image comes across in what you create and how it comes from a moment and a totally non-cerebral connection with nature. Kids on Bikes on a painting by David Park. Unreachable, beyond the glancing moment when titanium scrapes handlebars and pinwheels fly against the white cement, we hear the echoed call. We look for cars and find the summer's end and summer's race, a scramble at the rail that bars abstraction from a track of ochre clay, a face and hands, a formal portrait in refraction caught in an aside, a reverie. One instant in the long burn of the sun, recalled to orchestrate the harmony of twilight on an archetype of fun, an image we regard as an ideal, a flashpoint in the spinning of a wheel.
Mm-hmm. So since this isn't your image, you didn't generate it. Did you, how is it the poem came to be? Did you think of it as a kind of a response, as though there could be a kind of conversation, or to whom were you, how were you addressing what was out there, given that your prompt did not originate with you?
It's just, I've got the omnibus answer, like, who knows? I mean, this is a painting that matters to me a great deal. And I didn't say, because of that, I'm now going to sit down and write a poem about it. But somehow or another, it happened. I think, this as a painting, this says marvelous things with light, for one thing, and marvelous things with paint, and composition. And to me, it is an archetype of fun, and it just struck me in such a way that I got going on it. It's a poem several years old. I might have been able to give you a detailed answer about the process some years ago, but I'm glad that I can't now, frankly.
Oh, hopefully we all work enough that we can't remember the circumstances of where, at least with poems, where how they were generated. But I'm interested because you choose. It's a little bit like using words to describe music, which is notoriously difficult to do because the nature of music is you can stick words onto notes, but they're not similar.
Well, it's a form of translation, right?
Yeah.
Our good friend and fellow poet John J. Trouse has called basically an act of high treason, but it's something we're compelled to do, and it's very difficult to do. And we do our best. I mean, an ekphrastic poem to me is something I'll always struggle with, the definition of and how to approach it, because so many ekphrastic poems just describe the painting, and this is the last thing you want to do. What you want to do is create something new with a feeling, and in a sense, the painting was a prompt.
Yeah, and you've got both of the things you mentioned, the quality of the light on his face and shoulder and that bar of light on his forearm are amazing. But the background, the way the paint is painted in, the negative space, it's almost like gold leaf on an icon. It really promotes the portrait. And you've got that, an archetype, a reverie. You've got these kind of heightening words describing the painting.
Yeah.
Although
if you ever wanted to like be at the forefront of a backlash against abstraction, this is how you would do it.
Yes, I know his.
Well, I asked.
Wonderful.
I asked if it was a kind of a response. It's also kind of an homage because you're clearly very taken with what was accomplished in the painting.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, David Park is an absolute hero in my book, and I've spent a lot of time with a lot of his paintings, and I've never written about another one other than this one. It could be sort of the cumulative impact of this one painter on me that drew me to this one poem, I guess.
Wow.
Yeah.
Well, that's good because the other poems are connected to paintings that you did create yourself. So it's great to start elsewhere. I'm going to bring up the third leg of this three-legged stool with a short poem of mine that uses it uses a metaphor of wood carving. It has a chisel in it. It's as close as I get. I'm fascinated by the arts that you two practice because I don't practice visual arts at all, which means, well, I mean, except for film editing where you're cutting moving images. And so the magic and the mystery of it is still there for me. Whereas when I listen to a recording as a technician, I immediately start trying to figure out how it was done. And, I anatomize it almost against my better judgment. But I don't do that when I see the kinds of things that you do. And I'm very jealous of keeping that freshness. So this is a poem called A Burl for the Carving. And it has an accompanying quote from the I Ching, which I frequently repeat to my friends when they have difficulties. Human life is conditioned and unfree. I guess that's not news. It is well put. A burl for the carving. Hammer at the matter how you will. Close-grained as it is, its knots and burrs concealed until the first assay. Deflect and redirect the chisel's edge. Admit no easy progress. And assure an outcome imprecise. Wrought fine by will, but blunted where permission from the language is denied. I don't know if you struggle with words when you're writing poetry, because the examples of your poems that we're going to be speaking about are all so finely wrought and so formally well put together. But I can tell you that particularly in songwriting, in setting lyrics, because you have melodies that go up and down, and there are places where there is no solution. There is no good word that does what you need, everything that you needed to do. And you have to make the best of an indifferent bargain. I don't know. Do you encounter that? I don't really carve wood, but it is true that it's in the nature of wood. I guess it happens with stone. I don't know. Do you work in stone also, Meredith?
I have, but not in many years, because it is so unforgiving. And I never felt with it that I was getting permission from the language, so to speak.
Yeah. Yeah. I can remember one of the books that changed my life as a 15-year-old was the sort of quasi-biography of Michelangelo by Irving Stone, The Agony and the Ecstasy. And he writes at quite a good length about the process of carving the marble and the chisel, going through them, working with the stone, and occasionally, trying to find stone that doesn't have streaks of iron in it or that will cause these problems. And I don't practice that kind of activity, but it can, that I use the metaphor of the wood carving because there are places where the going gets all of a sudden much harder.
Yep. There's a grain to it that has a mind of its own, a direction of its own. And that's certainly true when you're trying to write formal poetry. You have constraints.
Yeah, well, of course, my metaphor is about writing poetry. It's not about carving at all. So that would be the handle that others could use to pick up this particular little poem. Yeah, I think we felt that. So I wanted to begin with that because even though it's not physical work, it's work.
Well, I struggle with words in every application, which might be obvious from today's program already.
No, it isn't.
That's 40 years of
Rick.
journalist too. But it's it's creative destruction. Any good art is a matter of scraping back. That's why for me, watercolors would be the equivalent of carving in stone, because you can't once you put a color on paper, no such thing as painting over, scraping off. Those are the experts. But words are, diction in poetry is an interesting thing because there's no standard. Every poem requires its own approach and economy. Light verse, I'm among those who constantly disparage it, but the economy of diction in a good light verse poem is an amazing thing. And it's hard won, it's not easy to do.
Yeah.
You could think of light verse as lacking what Stephen Spender called greatness of aim, but there's something to be said for perfectly finishing something that isn't meant to be epic. And I try not to look down on anything that's well done. I love to see things that are really well done, almost no matter what they are. If it's human activity, I respond to it.
I think of light verse as something athletic. You know, you're admiring the skill as well as enjoying the conceit.
Yeah, that's a great way to think of it.
It's the ultimate look at me approach to poetry, really.
Yeah.
There's nothing wrong with that. You know,
no, there's nothing wrong with that. And in fact, I did a show with Chris O'Carroll and Melissa Balmain on humor, and there were some excellent examples of just what you're talking about. Well, let's go to round two. If you tell me what you're going to read next, I will share it, Meredith.
Okay. I'll just go through these in the order. What Can Happen is next, and that's the studio.
Okay.
I don't have a view of the studio in which this poem is set, which was my studio from age 23 to about 34 years old. This was my second studio, which was in a half basement. So there's some windows out of sight down at the end, but it gives you a sense of all the projects going on, all the storage, all the stuff. And in the original studio, we invited my grandfather to come visit. We actually drove to New Jersey and got him. I grew up not far from where Rick lives, and several generations of my family had grown up there, had lived there. So we went and got him. We brought him back to show him a real sculptor's loft and film studio and several other things that were going on there, thinking that he would really, really, really enjoy it because he was very handy. He had put himself through night school in Newark, New Jersey. He was the youngest of 9 children with no money, put himself through night school to become a dentist by doing architectural drafting and tailoring and upholstery and a whole bunch of other crafts. And when I was very young, he would show me how to open up a chair and put it back together, how to open the shoulder of a suit and repair the pad or whatever. And I was absolutely certain that he would really like to see how I made sculptures. And Michael's lovely grandmother, my husband's lovely grandmother, was visiting us at the same time. We thought they might like to meet each other, these 2 old people in their 90s. She lived in Manhattan, so it wasn't so hard to go get her. And she speaks in the third stanza. What can happen? My mother's father, jack of all trades, retired from dentistry, but first he'd served a long apprenticeship at skills that I admired. His hands were clever and his fillings strong, though some of his repairs were not required. He'd given me his memory for song, his set of drafting tools in a velvet box, his wooden camera and canvas smocks. We brought him from New Jersey once to see my studio when he was very old. I showed him finished pieces and debris from sculpting them from armature to mold. And he responded from his parsimony. My toilet paper should instead be rolled from underneath so that I'd use much less. His sole reaction caused us some distress. Was he distracted by our other guest, my boyfriend's grandmother, perhaps with hope in new love at 90? She seemed quite impressed by him, but later wasn't really open when we, surprised, suggested, half in jest, something might happen. Happen? What can happen? Will they never bless our work, these vanished giants? I use a lot of paper in defiance. That's my Ars Poetica as well.
Well, you come out of the narrative in the last few lines, and then it becomes clear what else has been going on. I like the fact that you took a moment to point out that some of the dental work was not required. Does that mean what I think it means?
I suspect he was not a great dentist. He also had an old 52 Packard that was about 12 shades of black because he would do sort of dental work type repairs on the car every time he dinged it. He showed me how to do that too. The putty and the sanding and the spray paint and all of that. So my mother's teeth were not great. I'll put it that way.
Wow. Well, were you kind of initiated into hands-on activities well before you got into working at, okay. Do you think that was, do you look back on that as a kind of a preliminary, kind of a warm-up for what you did not yet know you were going to be doing with your hands later in life?
As a child, I was always busy making things or unmaking them, doing things with my hands. And I wanted skills. I wanted to learn how to do things. I never really had anyone to teach me carpentry, which is still a bit of a problem. But he certainly showed me a lot of interesting things that you can do with needle and thread and other tools. And I admired that and I loved him, but boy, was he disappointing at that moment.
Wow. When did you actually begin? Did you do a different art before sculpting, or did you start with that?
No, I didn't know if I was going to be an actress or a singer or an artist. I went off to college and I tried everything and I fell in love with art history. And I thought perhaps I should get out of there and go to art school. And in art school, I discovered sculpture.
Wow.
Quite by accident. But
Neat.
I had been making three-dimensional things. I just had no patience and no technique. So they had to be easy. Okay,
but nonetheless, it's not, I mean, I've known people who in their early teens already knew what their path was going to be as artists. I know musicians like that. And I myself was not like that. I gave up playing for 5 years in college and didn't start again until I had friends who encouraged me. And I didn't even think about, I would have never thought of being a professional musician when I was in college, but it came to me later. And then as it turned out, I was able to connect the musical skills that I developed with the writing that I had been doing in college. So I started out writing lyrics with a composer, and then he went to law school and stopped writing music. And so then I learned how to write music and I kind of became my own collaborator, which as it turns out, I mean,
it's like, I wrote poetry in college. I was the editor of my college literary magazine. And afterward, journalism paid, poetry did not pay. And I stopped writing poetry for 25 years or so, and got back into it only after I'd started painting.
How did you start painting? When
I'm sure I've told you this story before. I've told everyone I know this story.
I haven't heard it, so please tell me.
Yeah, okay. I think I've always wanted to paint, but I was on a business trip to Los Angeles some 35, 40 years ago. And, I had no car and I had to stay over for the weekend. So I looked at the stuff in the hotel, what was going on. And there was a Matisse associated exhibit going on at the Los Angeles County Museum of Art. It was something called the Fauve Landscape. I never heard of Fauves. And I went there and I walked into the museum, into the exhibit. It was a very large one of Fauve landscapes. The Fauves, of course, are painters early 20th century, including Matisse, even Picasso, Braque, many others. Very colorful, very immediate painting. And it was really my Saul of Tarsus moment in life. It was, I had to like leave. I was overwhelmed and I had to go out and sit outside where for some reason, I still remember they were playing the theme from Twin Peaks outside because it was like,
Wow.
that was like the year that that came out. Then I went back in and I spent the rest of the evening. I closed the museum and I went home and just bought paint. Um, and you know, God bless my wife who didn't know she was marrying a future artist. And I was thinking in preparing for today, like, what am I going to say? The one thing I'm going to say is that Bukowski tells us that we must find the thing we love and let it kill us. I'm at very little risk of poetry killing me, but painting is definitely going to kill me.
Oh,
That's how
yeah.
that happened. But one night I was listening to the radio. It was the 50th anniversary of Howells being read in San Francisco.
Mm.
And I said, wow, that's interesting. You know, and it just brought me back to the poetry I wrote when I was younger. And I was just getting disgusted with journalism already. So I needed to, you know, find other things to like consume whatever time I'm stealing from my employer. And, you know, I started writing poetry
Wow.
again.
Wow. That's a
Great
great story.
I don't think I'd heard either of those.
Let me clarify. I never stole any time from an employer. Just put it that way.
Of course
I
not.
could promise to edit that out, but I'd only be lying.
You know, just you know, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, that's a terrific lead-in. Let's have your second offering here then. What are you going to read? And I'll get the image up.
I'm going to read sculpture. I'm sort of inspired to do that after Meredith's last one.
Great.
Okay, hang on a moment.
I published this poem.
Yeah, there's a Meredith connection.
Yep.
I was just about to say, American Arts Quarterly.
Mm-hmm.
That was a thrill.
Oh, really?
That was a thrill early in my coming back to poetry. I read this at Carmel Street Metrics, and Meredith approached me afterward. I've just babbled on so long. I'll just keep this short. This is basically a poem about, or this is a poem about a woman named Judith Ann Scott, who has Down syndrome and a twin sister. And the poem, I think, speaks for itself. Sculpture. On seeing the cocoons of Judith Ann Scott and a photo of the artist with her work. A knotted skin of yarn and Christmas lights contains the torso. An apostrophe of swollen limblessness and parasites, an armature of stolen property and attic dust. It spoke of motherhood. It would not easily be photographed. She rolled her heavy eyes. She understood why sister cried and why nobody laughed. It smelled like kitchen towels and styrofoam, a bra, a yellow butcher's smock, and tin. It sparkled like the errant chromosome, or junk if they forgot to plug it in. And when she pressed up hard against its side, the lullaby within would come untied. American Museum of Visionary Art, Baltimore, October 3rd, 2009.
Well, boy, this is more than just an homage. You're really extending the essence of the work. That's extraordinary. Where'd you get those ideas?
And, you know, we were speaking in the green room about our mutual friend Ned Balbo. Probably many listeners know Ned, and he invited me to participate in a panel on the eye in lyric poetry, which is just a fascinating topic to me, and it goes back to the German Romantics and Kant and Fichte and this idea that you create the world, that is generated from the eye, the Ich philosophy, etc. And she created this world. There are all sorts of funny stories about people at the institutions where she was kept, their phones would disappear and end up, being found inside these cocoons that she built. And her sister finally got her out of the institution. I mean, the story of the two sisters is amazing, but the amazing thing is just the creative urge and the urgency, which you can see in this picture, and the connection to, your expression, your expression of experience. And to me, it's just the essence of art. All art, poetry, dance, music.
Also that she stole what she put inside, and things, not just phones, but many things would disappear into these sculptures.
Yeah.
Seems
Really?
appropriate to what we all do. Also.
Yes. Picasso said, if it's there, I steal it, or something like that. He said a lot of things.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So did her sister take the photograph? Or do we know who
I don't know who
took
took
the
the
photograph?
photograph. No, I don't know. She's a wonderful person to Google image, because she wore like a John Donne-like hat most of the time, and she was just very interesting in terms of she made her own clothing and things, but the sort of thing that she really concentrated on were these cocoons.
Mhm.
Wow.
Yeah. It's a wonderful poem.
Thank you.
Yeah, and what an inspiration.
Yeah. The
Boy.
Baltimore Museum of I forgot the name.
Visionary art.
Visionary art. Yeah, it's a must to see. It's, even in Baltimore, it stands out as just a wonderful explosion of weirdness and filled with great art.
Mhm.
One of my favorite quotes from Einstein is that he said, imagination is better than knowledge because there's a limit to knowledge.
Yeah. I think imagination
So,
defines us as human beings. Imagination is, better
yeah,
than our opposable thumb, I would hope. But
yeah,
what do we?
I think you're
Dogs
right.
probably have imaginations too. I shouldn't say,
Yeah, but I mean, I think it is innate in us that in one way or another, we take the rise to consciousness up further when we engage our imaginations.
Mhm.
Yeah, I think it's when used for good, one of our greatest powers. Unfortunately, people also imagine horrors. But well, thank you. That's really remarkable.
Mhm.
I have to go in a different direction. I have nothing inspired by or executed in the way this has been. But I can talk in this poem about one of my other artistic activities, which is playwriting. And this is a poem about a play, a musical play that I wrote in 1968. And so even though it mentions that the play is set in Spain of 1600, the production that is described and the scene that is detailed in the course of this poem took place at Brown in 1968. But this was a scene from a musical play that I had written based fairly loosely on the life of El Greco. So it's a musical play about an artist and about his artistic vision.
Al, can you put yourself back on the screen? I'm looking at a tiny thumbnail of you.
Well, let me stop the share.
Okay, great.
And now if I start talking, perhaps I'll come back on the screen.
Good. Good.
Very good. Thanks for mentioning that.
Mhm.
So the main thing that's going on in the play, other than the artist's immense ego, is he has a mistress who is blind and who and El Greco had a mistress, but she wasn't blind. I made her blind, and I made her obsessed with death. in the sort of Spanish way. And she leaves her family to live with the painter, and her father basically repudiates her and cuts her off. Later, when she breaks up with the artist, she tries to go back home, and that's what this scene is about. An onstage silence. A moment in the middle of a silence. 5 characters unmoving on a stage, their actions driven inward, each one caught and paralyzed between conflicting gales. The father, proud and deeply shamed, extends with the electric gesture of a hand the sharp command that none may say a word. His wife and younger daughters dare not move. But on their faces, all can see their love and pity for the oldest daughter, come to beg that she be taken back into the family, deserted for a lover. Blinded by an illness as a child, she hadn't thought that she'd survive, and since condemned to brood on her escape, was sure that death would soon come back for her. She'd been unlikely to succumb to love, but once ensnared, she was forever torn between her unfamiliar hopes to share a future and expectations of her certain end. She'd given up her family's protection and gone to live in sin with her new man, knowing how her father would be hurt. Poor as he was, he never could forgive the damage she would do to his good name and her rejection of him as a parent. Let some other man provide for her. Her bond with him was gone, broken forever. Risking it all, she'd walked away uncertain of the outcome. When that kind of love available to everyone but her, it seemed, proved temporary, she was trapped. So here she was again, back in that tiny house whose walls she didn't need to touch to navigate. Her mother and 2 sisters close by, as she could tell, but saying nothing. And he was there, she knew, enforcing silence. She could feel the women reaching out, but they were not permitted to acknowledge her. Torn as they were, they had no choice. As vividly as she remembered them, she could imagine each of their expressions. Though since she couldn't see her father's face, she couldn't tell all it was costing him. But as the scene played out in front of us, the audience, the faces on the stage revealed conflicting feelings in succession as growing silence twisted up the tension. As her pleas receded into time, there came a moment when she realized she wouldn't be accepted. Suddenly, her last hope vanished. Her expression fell. It's at that point that all the conflict drains out of their faces. Motionless, the actors settle into parts of a tableau which could have been a still in sepia or a painting capturing the group, its somber palette, all the tans and browns and verging into saturated blacks used by Murillo when he painted beggars. So I was very pleased that I managed to write a scene without words that was kind of a pure theatrical reality, because it's kind of at the other end of the rope of what I do most of the time, which is never stop talking and using words one way or another. But the actors did a terrific job on this, and I didn't have a camera, so I wrote this fairly long poem to get us to the end where hopefully we can imagine this scene, this tableau.
It's a very strong ending because of the way you use the Murillo painting and the deployment of black. It really takes away from the characters in the play to, an image of a face that expresses something comparable. It's a great simile.
Well, thanks. I can't paint, but I can use those color words as close as I can get. I mean, musically, tones also have their colors. And so that's something I can do. But again, if I could paint, I would probably have just painted that scene and left it at that, the moment. And the actors did such a great job that literally when she realizes that she isn't going to be accepted back, her face does fall, and everybody else in the family reacts to it. The woman who played the part was JoBeth Williams, who went on to do very, very many films in Hollywood. She was, in her early career, she was in Kramer versus Kramer. She was in The Big Chill. She was in Poltergeist. She's been in a lot of films, and she showed talent even in her teens. And I was fortunate to have her.
Facial expression acting is one of the most difficult things in the world, because if you know somebody's doing it, it doesn't work. There are actors, really bad face actors. They just overdo it.
Yeah.
It's the greatest gift an actor can have, where you don't have words, and you've got to, with just your mug.
Yeah, that's true. And it's a very, very. I'm sorry. Go ahead, Meredith.
It works well in film, where you can be right up against somebody's face as if you were with them. On stage, though, you really do need a stage picture like this. You need to see the relationships across yards of space and gestures and things like that. And you've captured that very well. It reminds me a little of The House of Bernarda Alba, which I must have seen, a production of in high school or something, because it feels.
That's funny, because I've seen The House of Bernarda Alba, and I think I saw it at Brown before I wrote that play. So possibly I stole from it. But the comment that you make about film,
the mood and the daughters and the repression, and the shame are all the haunting of that. It feels like that in the best possible way.
Well, thank you. What Rick has said about facial acting, and what you've amplified by mentioning film and then bringing up the stage situation, it's a whole different class of technique to act with your face in film, where the camera is the distance to the person. Whereas, of course, in a theater, you've got to be more stylized, because you've got to present the same thing to people close and far away from you. And a great illustration of the difference is the film that was made of Olivier's production of Othello in 1965, where the cameras were in the theater. They just filmed one of the evening's productions, but they blew up the images for close-ups when they thought it was appropriate. And of course, Olivier appears to be overacting, just violently overacting, because he's acting for the back of the house. And they move the camera to 2 feet away from him. So you can't simultaneously act with your face as in film and on stage. They're very different. And you're exactly right. You got to think in terms of the composition of people being able to see the entire stage at once, and also the depth, who's upstage, who's downstage. So it's something I enjoy. And what I do, I haven't written stage plays in a long time, because what I've been doing the last 5 years is writing audio plays. And in the case of audio plays, the acting all has to be done with the voice. And that's a very interesting challenge for actors. Okay, so we're coming back round. What will your next one be?
On visiting my monument at night.
Okay, hang on.
That's the Boston Women's Memorial, and that actually relates to this subject. I won my first big commission in 1998 for a women's memorial for Boston that the challenge was to create a contemporary artwork that was in harmony with a 19th century environment on a beautiful street with no advertising, no stores. And the three women never interacted. I don't think they ever met each other. One was born the year another died. And I showed them each separately, but I had to relate them kind of like creating a stage picture. But it makes it very hard to photograph as an object. You have to get kind of far away and show all three. So here's a photo of one of them. And the other two women are Abigail Adams and Phyllis Wheatley, whose poetry I had heard of but never read. And that's really what brought me back into poetry. 1998 to 2003. Then I went to the 92nd Street Y and took a class with Charles Martin, wonderful poet and translator.
Wow, sure.
But I had to try to figure out who Phyllis Wheatley was, and I read all her letters, and I read all her poetry, and I read as much criticism and biography as I could find. But I ended up also reading Alexander Pope and other poets that she was supposedly emulating, and kind of doing Poetry 101, which I had never had in college. So it was thrilling because I had written poetry in junior high and high school, and then kind of gotten too intimidated by the college poets I met and just stopped trying. And I hadn't discovered formal poetry, which for me was perfect because you know when you're done. I mean, you have constraints, you have a shape, you're making a thing. And when the thing is finished, you have to stop talking. You have to fit it into this shape. So that made a great deal of sense to me as an artist and a sculptor. Anyway, so this is a poem about attempting to photograph this thing. And it's really more about being done with something and remembering the process than about the process of making it. On visiting my monument at night. A dog is urinated on the granite. Night blinded, I'm relieved that I can see it, his bright black stain against the charcoal stone. One sculpted eye gleams briefly. Nothing on the figures holds against the tide of headlights sluicing them all. The bronze is cold, the lithe bodies frozen, and the chipped stones softening. No comfort here. I've stroked these folds so often that by touch I flick familiar spiders' nests and free a cigarette butt from a nostril. Finally, with a long exposure, cradling my chilly lens, I focus crudely on the statues and pray my camera can see them. The passers-by, their dogs, don't seem to see me. This must be what an afterlife is for, to feel unmarked, untraced, the outgrown forms.
Another beautiful ending.
Thank you.
Makes me want to think about the afterlife in a different way. Because I sometimes think about my idea of the afterlife, but yours is different.
Well, I think that artists haunt their works in some sense. So being there and having no one take any notice and it being nighttime felt like visiting a cemetery. I mean, just felt kind of ghostly.
Well, I don't know if you think this way, but it's also not certain, but very, very likely that this work will be there long after all three of us are gone.
Well,
and so
when you create a work of art, you put it out into the world, And in essence, it's everybody's, it's not yours anymore.
Right.
And if it's a monument in a park, it's very much that case. And then you come back to it, you're a ghost visiting this thing in its sort of eternal life. It is a very interesting turn there.
Well, I've been
Yeah,
studying.
you've got something that, I'm sorry, go,
No,
please
go ahead.
go. I was going to say, this is,
yeah.
It's in a public space. And I mean, I'm used to performing in front of the public, but I'm there when it's happening. This goes on without your presence. So do you sort of feel that, I don't know, it's an interesting relationship for me. I have recordings, and another person can listen to the recording, and that's when I have my say. I have no input into when any of that happens. But this is a persistent invitation to all who pass by to enter into your vision of these women. And you can ignore it, but it's there.
Oh, yeah.
And the invitation continues.
I don't make these things for me. I make them for me and the world. I mean, there's no suppression of my own need to create things, but they're designed to exist completely independently of me. They're really made for unknown people who need them, who I have to imagine. Whereas other work that I make, I really do make for my own amusement in many ways. I still want it to have a life out in the world. But this kind of work, there's years of working with groups of people and getting approvals and explaining the idea to them and winning support for the idea and raising money and getting people to take ownership of it and love it and protect it and use it. So it's very different from just making a kind of a preposterous thing that you love that should exist, which is sort of how my other works come into being.
So what's the balance at this stage in your life? Because I mean, you've received a large level of acceptance over time. What's the balance between that kind of work that you just characterized as being for you and everyone else against what you do to please yourself? Is it 80-20?
Right. Yeah, at the moment it's more 80-20, this kind of work, because I'm still trying to make a living doing this. And because I want to create enough of these that I stand up for the idea that they can be real art as well as civic sculptures. They're not like a lesser art form, because the art world sneers at this kind of work, especially the New York City art world. They're not considered real art. And I think that's nonsense. So I'm always trying to put in some kind of a conceptual twist or something that is for my own amusement, but that other people can enjoy as well, so that the whole thing is being ever so slightly subverted or questioned, as well as asserting, the moral earnestness of the 19th century, or the value of history, or the underrepresentation of women finally getting redressed, or whatever the message of the monument is. Also, it needs to be me having fun too. And there's a lot of artists who just do this stuff with humorless sincerity, and they make statue after statue, and there really is not much art there. There may be huge amounts of skill and even beauty, but there's not a lot of surprise or self-questioning or knowledge of history or philosophical dilemmas about the place of this thing in the world. Zip, it's just like a statue. So I'm trying to make these to bring in all these larger issues and keep the tradition alive and moving forward. Because the art of this century has humor. It has a great deal of conceptual punch, a lot of subversiveness and redefinition of the tradition. And I want to try to take all that freedom and use it for these very traditional projects. So I don't win everything I apply for by a long shot.
So what would be in the process, and you just, I mean, obviously a lot of it is external to the physical process of creating the work itself. All the politicking and the fundraising and all of that is separate. But I think your characterization of the element of surprise being something that's appropriate to genuine art, as opposed merely to the execution of of a task requiring skill. Where in the process might the surprise enter in for you? How does that happen, and where does it happen, or has it happened? Just for one example, if you could.
That's a lot to try to answer. I tend to think in terms of absurdity and preposterousness. So I will often, and my husband Michael helps me with this, he's always proposing zebras and just absurd things to kind of leaven this process. So when I designed this, I put in a kind of a joke, which is that the women have come down off their pedestals. They use the vocabulary of elements, the language of all the other statues along this mall. Big granite pedestals, important inscriptions, lifelike bronze figures doing something. But these women have come down and they've kind of dumped their pedestals over and they're using them as work surfaces. Lucy Stone is editing her newspaper. And she's climbed up on her stone, kind of trailing her skirt, because she was a very active person. She was a fighter. So, and that idea popped into my head very early on. So I'll get outrageous ideas and I'll whittle them down. Again, in this kind of reactive state of, I don't want to do that, or, oh God, that's stupid, or what the hell are they thinking? And then pop will come an idea. Kind of into a vacuum, but the vacuum is created by rejecting things that I don't want to do or don't like, or wish no one else would do either. Things like that.
Thank you for taking the time to fashion that response. It's very helpful, and I'm going to come back to it not too many minutes from now. I didn't mean to cut you off, Rick. What were you going to say?
I'm just stunned when I think about what you have to go through, Meredith, to create art. I mean, to have things like committees where there are bound to be people who, set their hearts against whatever you want to do, and the politics, and not just of the what might be expressed in the art, but the actual real politics involved with dealing with the public. And it's much worse than somebody saying, will you paint a picture of my dog from a photograph? You've got like a whole lot of pressure, and you manage to get that thought of yours through there and make something of your own. In the end, it's really
just
staggering,
a question
frankly.
of scale, Rick.
I don't know what to say.
It's just a question of scale, because with the dog, there's going to be expectations and disappointments. There's going to be some reason they want that painting of the dog, besides it's cool to have a painting of your dog, but some hidden psychological need for that painting of a dog. And they're going to have a concept of what the painting of the dog would mean that you might disappoint. I mean, it's all the same stuff. Also, when they want it delivered, how much they're willing to pay, how many colors, it doesn't look like my dog.
If I agree to paint your dog from a photograph, I love you. I don't do that.
Okay,
Very special case.
all right. Good, good.
Oh,
I'm glad you're spared all this.
well, thanks for sharing that because it really is atypical of most of our artistic lives. So, I mean, it would have been similar for me if I were working for a record company that was not my own independent record company. I would have to placate owners and producers and listen to their off the wall ideas and play
Mhm.
politics and play nice. And I chose instead to spend all my money on achieving that freedom.
Mhm.
So, uh, so of course, at the end, you've got your work done, but you have no money. But anyway, you're up, Rick.
Okay.
What are you going to be reading?
Let's spin the wheel here. I'm going to read The Dream of Art.
Mm,
Okay, hang on a moment and I'll pull it up.
yeah. And which image goes with this?
It's this one.
Oh, wow.
That's it. Yes. This is really the recounting of a dream that incorporates some of the practical anxieties and artistic challenges of painting, especially in a home studio situated underneath the rest of the home. The Dream of Art. The eyes of the Yemeni tribal chief are hard and wet, an altogether promising start, despite my painting from a souvenir card and not from the sitting model. His antique heart is next. But how can I find it underneath the robes and leather belt? Behind the knife? Impossible. Instead, I count the teeth and wait. But I've been waiting half my life. The telephone rings upstairs. It keeps on ringing as I adjust the dangling iron lantern. I'm kneeling in my pallet. The lamp keeps swinging, twirling, brushing light against a pattern in the gessoed canvas on the bone-dry size of cavities and pearls that were his eyes.
That's wonderful. Wow.
Mm.
I've come to almost regret swiping the line from Eliot in the wasteland there at the end. But
Yeah, I was going to ask you about that because I thought that Eliot was transposing the line from the Shakespeare song.
From the Tempest.
These are the pearls that were his eyes.
Yes.
Yeah.
So I mean, I think the fact that it's the very last line makes it you have more license to get away with it as the last statement than if you had just kind of dropped it in the middle and it seemed like it was.
I'm going to ask a question that might cause a pause. Are you hearing like a lot of kitchen banging
No.
and water running?
No.
Well, you guys are in better shape than I am. All right, let's continue. Thanks.
Well, carry on. So in other words, this process of painting and making art is not easy. It's a struggle. Is that what you?
Yes, it's the matter of life and death. As soon as it gets
You mean
easy,
it's hard?
like I said, this is what's going to kill me.
Yeah.
It's hard to explain to anybody really what it's like, and it's probably different for everybody who does it. But it's a struggle. Formulas are the worst thing that could happen to you. An artist who's obviously essentially a craftsperson is not gonna create something that has any feeling, so it's not something that you can just sort of do by a process or by the numbers, and you're always as you know, you're always encountering failure, and sometimes the destructive creativity just becomes destruction, and there's there's no way out. And that gets into the question of when are you done with this picture? It's just it will in the end it will grind your face into the dirt and push you 6 feet under.
Well, when Frost said no tears in the writer, no tears in the reader, he was getting at the heart of that you can't express an emotion that you haven't felt, and make anyone else feel it. So that suggests that it's quite natural for you to generate work that's born out of that struggle. And if the work itself expresses strong feelings, or if there's struggle in the work itself, that's to be expected.
Let me put it this way, and I'm conscious of the fact that this is a sort of a controversial thing, and I'm now going to lose like another whole sort of tranche of friends. But John Singer Sargent sucks. There's no indication that he ever struggled. I wouldn't say that about Mozart, but I'll definitely say that about him.
I don't have a problem with that, Rick. Is this a self-portrait, by the way? Is this a self-portrait?
Yes, it's called, I should have mentioned that it's called self-portrait reciting, i.e. poetry.
Well, you have shown the toll that the process takes on you. You've got hollows in your cheeks, and your head is radiating heat, in this kind of aura halo volcanic thing going on. It's very dramatic.
I can say that I did this one in a very short time. I hit this one like a ton of bricks, And that doesn't always mean that it's going to be better than something you labored over. But in this case, it was something that I did very quickly and named it after I looked at it, not intending to paint me reciting a poem.
Well, it makes
so it was something that you were ready to do.
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
It was like it was like a bodily function. I mean, it had to happen.
It makes you look like a prophet.
It does.
That's nice to hear. Thank you. Yeah. It's
yes.
It's
and of course, being a prophet's not easy either. You can tell that it's not easy to be a prophet.
Yeah.
Which it wasn't for any of them, as far as I can tell.
No, that's very difficult. I'm reading James Baldwin's The Fire Next Time, in which he writes a lot about Christianity and the prophets, and he's one of the best writers about the the maniacal insanity of St. Paul, who was the architect of the church. Yeah, prophets are not to be fooled with.
Yeah. I think my favorite line in this may be, "I'm kneeling in my pallet."
I'm sorry, I didn't hear what you said.
I think my favorite line in this poem may be, "I'm kneeling in my pallet."
I think that's kind of the turn, it's like all this stuff is going on, and then the narrator realizes, look where I am, that now it's very physical. It's no longer, the quandary of how do you find the heart, and what am I going to do? Count the teeth, it's like, look where I am.
I love the counting the teeth too. But also in dreams, there's no real sense of scale or size. So you could almost be swimming in your palette. You're kind of, I don't know how big your palette is, but the ones I remember were hardly big enough to kneel in.
Mine's big enough to kneel. I've done it.
Okay.
You climb around a lot when you have limited space to work in.
Yeah.
Well, one of the things I hoped that would come out of the three of us having a conversation was the opportunity for each of us to learn something that we didn't know about the way the others operate. So this is a perfect example of, again, not being any kind of a painter, I have no idea how big a palette is. Occasionally I see those drawings where they look like they're about 8 inches across, but that's just,
With a little hole for the
that's,
thumb.
Right.
yeah, with a little hole for the thumb. I don't know
You could do
too
it
much
that way
about
if you
this.
want. Some people do that, I guess.
Mhm.
Mine is like a big board that I just, throw paint on.
Great. I mean, these are
It's like a little piece of wood. You can paint on anything with the palette.
those are the things I love to hear. But that explains why, and we're going to get to this when you get to your to lines, which is even chewier than this. But I mean, technically, there's so much depth in the way that you're applying. You're applying the paint. It makes the overall image as energetic and active as it is. It just bristles. It intrudes into your own space. It comes out at you. So, wow. Well, thank you for this one.
Very much.
Yeah.
Well, I wanted to read in this particular round the poem that I have that does speak a little bit to what you've done here, and a little bit more to what Meredith did in the previous poem, which is to say, where do these things come from? And a little bit about the birthing process, at least for me. And this is called The Next Idea. And it's a generalization, but it's a pretty, it's pretty solid generalization. Most of the time it's like this. The next idea. I make a space for it, and it appears. I feel it coming on as though I'm filled flush to the brim, and then beyond. It spills up, out into the light. Its image clears. It soon declares itself and calls by name what I must call it and must let it be. My mind is empty. I wait patiently and watch it take its shape within the frame. It often comes continuous, complete. Sometimes I need to pause and clean the way, but trusting as I do that it will say all that it needs to when at last we meet. Such visits have been going on for years. I make a space for it, and it appears. So I have a superstition that the things that I produce, it's a pretty Platonic concept, that the things that I produce existed, and all I'm doing is uncovering them. That they exist in their entirety. So a song, for instance, a melody from the beginning to the end with the accompanying words already exists. And so somehow all I'm doing is just allowing it to come through and not getting in its way. And I call it a superstition because the older I get, the more I think that really it's just a way of outwitting my own mind into not engaging my mind, but letting what's deeper come through. And so if I can access things from deep enough down, then I don't have to get to the point where I have to take apart something I've written and change it all around. But I don't know whether things exist and we just uncover them. There's that cliche about carving marble that you just take away everything that doesn't look like the Pietà. I guess you could consider that somewhere in the marble, the Pietà is complete, and it's just a matter of letting it come out. But we do know that there's effort and will of our own required, or else these things don't come out in any form.
This gets at the essence of the German Romantics and Kant and Fichte, and the idea that the thing in and of itself is unattainable. It's, you know, it's the things we put around to perceive them, but finally it is, you know, the world comes through us, and it's a matter of our creating what was already there.
Yeah,
In a way that can be expressed.
das Ding an sich, I think is the way they put it. And I studied German for 8 years, and I read a lot of German literature at Brown. And yeah, I've read me a whole lot of those romantics from Novalis, you know, through.
There's a distinction that I make, and I guess a lot of people make, between invention and creativity, where invention is a matter of producing something useful, and creativity is a matter of really expression, and expression of experience. So it's not, I mean, it sort of rings a bell to hear this notion of, you know, a song being there, but you, the musician, the artist, embody it as an actual song, as your experience and expression. You know, it's a matter of, again, I mean, the distinction you might make between a scientific genius and an artistic genius. They're both confronting chaos. The scientist finds order. The artist finds clarity.
Yeah.
You know, it's a different means of extracting something that we can put our hands around, or our you know, our awareness around, out of the chaos that is nature.
Yeah, the problem with songs in particular is that, unlike other works of art, I mean, if you can bring a painting into existence, or a sculpture into existence, or a poem into existence, but we've all experienced and internalized hundreds and thousands of songs, and you never know when you think you've uncovered one that nobody's uncovered before, whether you're remembering it because you heard it, you're George Harrison and you heard My Sweet Lord. That actually does happen. I mean, there are people who steal songs, but it really can happen that you're just convinced deeply that you've never heard this melody before. When Paul McCartney wrote Yesterday, he went around and asked everybody he knew if they'd ever heard that melody before. And everybody said no. But he had to be convinced that he had actually written it.
I have that problem sometimes with getting ideas for sculpture commissions, because I have such an enormous slide file of sculptures in my head. I sometimes can't tell if the thing has already been made or hasn't. And if I can't,
wow, so it does happen with sculpture.
I have to go and come up with yet another idea. But I want to get back to your poem for a minute, because it's very intriguing for me, because you don't name the muse. And yet this is a very good description of courting a muse, as if to personify the it in your poem. And I vastly prefer it as an it than as a young woman in a clinging negligee who floats through the air and comes bringing
and brings you a manuscript. No, it doesn't work for me either. It's proto, you know, it's pre anthropomorphic representation. It wouldn't be a woman, at least not, you know, not the Greek ideal. But I have another poem called His Daemon Tells It Like It Is, which is more explicit in personifying. And the gist of that poem is that the daemon is speaking very proudly about how, I say he, but it doesn't have any gender, about how the artist thinks that he has some control over what he's doing, but actually the daemon is doing it all.
Well, I think one element you may have left out that's very important to me is play, playfulness, mischief even. I spoke earlier about subversiveness, but part of imagination being a kind of absence of intent. not a need to clarify at all, perhaps a need to muddy or to obscure or to complicate playfully something that is maybe too painfully plain. So that's one
Well,
of
I'm going to get to that in my last poem where I talk about improvising, because that is not called playing for nothing.
Yeah.
That's the principal area of my life where it is play, you know, in informed, prepared play, but play nonetheless. So we'll get to that.